I think the most important thing that we're facing culturally right now is this idea that brands are investing more and more in collecting and leveraging data on their customers. And so that's clearly where Jebbit has a sort of great fit. But there's this really interesting cultural balance against incoming privacy legislation and this really, really hard balance coupled with, let's call it, the scare and the fear that's happening for marketers around third-party cookies going away and this idea that we're losing lots of intent and signal data. How are they going to balance all of that out? To me, it's a really interesting time to be a marketer, particularly a data-driven marketer, because we're constantly battling a few different threads, which is all this incoming privacy legislation.
I'm Jonathan Gandalf, and welcome to the Content Cocktail Hour, powered by The Juice. Our mission is to squeeze out the deepest secrets of B2B marketing professionals to help you push your brand to the forefront of the industry. Let's raise a glass. I'm thrilled to be joined by David Kavanagh, CMO at Jebbit today. We're going to be discussing going back to basics in B2B marketing, which I'm really excited about. I've got some strong opinions on this topic, but David, thanks so much for being here today.
Gosh, you're so welcome. I'm super excited to be here, Jonathan.
Great. Well, David, we are big fans of Jebbit and love what you all do for marketers with marketers. I was actually doing a little bit of research before the recording, interested in your background a little bit. You've been through several kind of very intense data stops. You were in the payroll space, in the HR space, financial services space. Now you're helping customers with their data. So maybe before I butcher that anymore, why don't, in your own words, I'd love to hear a little bit about your background and about Jebbit itself.
Sure. My background is that I tend to switch jobs every sort of 3 to 4 years. And so, yeah, when people look at my resume, they go, oh, wow, you've had a lot of jobs. And the answer is yes, I have. I am 48 years old. And so I've grown up as purely a digital marketer. And so in the early days of my career, I was working with companies and helping define and build big digital strategies. And so as companies started to embrace the web, that just became a thing. It was a very needed skill. I was able to go off and lead big teams of people doing really cool, innovative work with some really cool brands. But at the end of the day, yeah, it's given me this like really, really strong foundation in just like how B2B works. And so I've had the pleasure of working for some really big companies. Yes, in the insurance and FI space, I've become, I'll say, a bit of a MarTech leader, in part because and maybe I shouldn't say a bit of a MarTech leader. I'll call myself a MarTech leader.
I think that's fair.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, mostly purely through experience of just like needing to buy, purchase, and advise organizations on the right technology investments that they make. And so it led me to this great role at Jebbit, which is working as a CMO for a MarTech company whose sole job is to help our customers get better data on their customers. And so Jebbit does that in a bunch of different ways, typically through interactive quizzes, surveys, things, lookbooks, mood boards. But the goal is for us to help our customers collect and then activate better data on their customers. And so we make it a full-time job to help them create really, really cool, fun experiences that ensure that the customers actually want to give data to these brands. And so it's a perfect role for me, in part because it plays well into both my background and the things that I'm really passionate about, which is delivering great user experience and getting great data along the way. So yeah, I'm excited about this role, and it plays well into my skills. And it is, I'll say, very different than some of the roles I've had working at giant organizations. Jebbit is still a small, scrappy startup. We're about 80 people, and we're just filled with like super passionate, interesting people. And I love bringing that to life and letting customers know how fun and interesting we are and how we can really help them. So it's cool. It's a great job. It's been fun so far.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and we've learned from you all along the way. So you all are bringing that energy, which we appreciate. So this is the Content Cocktail Hour. We always like by starting our guests, what are you enjoying drinking nowadays?
So my Canadian rye drinking fans, I'm a Canadian, and I'll just say I grew up, on Crown Royal and Canadian rye. My current favorite is Rittenhouse rye, which is a US rye. I'll just say an old fashioned with some Rittenhouse rye. It's a bit spicy. And I'll say, yeah, it's a pretty complex, it's a classic rye, but it's actually really fun and interesting. And I will say I blame / am grateful for my former colleague and mentor, Maggie Lauer. She introduced me to Rittenhouse rye a bunch of years ago and suggested, why don't you go with rye versus bourbon in an old fashioned? It's a little more complex and interesting. And I couldn't agree with her more. So it's been, that's my current go-to.
That is not the expert advice that I typically anticipate on this podcast, but that is expert advice. I'm a bit of a bourbon fan myself. You can see
There you
there's a
go.
barrel behind us. So we've got we've got two rye fans here on this particular episode.
I will note that, yeah, we Canadians enjoy our rye and our Canadian whiskey, as many people call it. And again, I feel maybe I'm betraying my country a little bit by saying that I'm a fan of an American rye, but it's great. And for those of you that haven't tried Rittenhouse, you can get it at your local store nearby. Enjoy.
Exactly. We can all get along. American whiskey, Canadian whiskey is all good. So cool. This almost feels like a bit of a housekeeping question to kind of jump into the conversation with, but you mentioned helping your customers collect data on their customers, first party data, technically, as it's known. In this world where all things data are evolving pretty quickly, zero party data, first party, second, third party, intent data is very critical to a lot of marketing organizations. Can you just give us a state of the state on data and how marketers should or should not be thinking about it with all of this evolution happening?
I think the most important thing that we're facing culturally right now is this idea that brands are investing more and more in collecting and leveraging data on their customers. And so that's clearly where Jebbit has a sort of great fit. But there's this really interesting cultural balance against incoming privacy legislation and this really, really hard balance coupled with, let's call it, the scare and the fear that's happening for marketers around third-party cookies going away and this idea that we're losing lots of intent and signal data. How are they going to balance all of that out? To me, it's a really interesting time to be a marketer, particularly a data-driven marketer, because we're constantly battling a few different threads, which is all this incoming privacy legislation. How do we collect data in a privacy forward and compliant way? How do we give real value exchange to our customers? And then how do brands leverage that data to make better personalization choices and ultimately do a better job as a steward of that data to deliver better experiences? And as I said, this time culturally is just really interesting because we've got all of these things either pressing up against each other and creating a really interesting cultural tension. And I think it's just candidly, it's tough to navigate. It's very difficult for marketers today to wake up and go, okay, how do I build a zero and or first party data strategy? How do I combine that with ads? How do I work with my legal teams to figure out what can I collect and how do I use it? And then how do you just create really great experiences for those customers? It is not easy. So I'll say the state of it is a bit in flux. I think there's a lot of brands that are trying to figure that out. I think there's a lot of brands who have been having conversations over the last couple of years with their legal and compliance teams going, how do we do this in a really safe and privacy forward way, but also make sure that we can grow our business appropriately while they're trying to balance, how do I keep my ad spend and moving to cookieless? It's tough. So I just say it's a really big and meaty problem that I think a lot of marketers are waking up to every single day. And yet, at the same time, there's never been better solutions out there for people to be able to leverage this data in really effective ways. And I think consumers in particular want really great personalized experiences. I think there's been an education to the point where people really do understand the sort of the privacy trade-off, this paradox that, you're giving your data to people, you want brands to use it in a really safe way, but also deliver great experiences. And so I said, I think there's never been a better time for data forward thinking marketers to be able to just create really great connections with their customers. And as I said, it's also the best time because there's just never been as many tools available to us. So obviously we're customers of the juice. And again, the idea that there's so much great content out there that you can leverage and really understand how to get better at your job and how to be able to just, live in this sort of world where there's all these competing priorities and all these pressures. And yet there's also never been as many tools and as much interesting content out there for you to help navigate it. So we meet self-starter sort of data marketers all the time who just think about creating a great experience and they just dive right in with a tool like Jebbit, end up building big data strategies for their companies, which are really important and powerful. And it comes from all sorts of interesting places. It's not always CTOs telling us how to make these decisions or CMOs necessarily. We see a lot of great marketing managers and data analytics, people who are trying to solve these problems themselves. So it's just a really cool and interesting time, I think, where there's so much tech, there's so much great content, and such an important pressing need to get it right that, it's the best time to be a data-driven marketer.
I love the language you used of being a steward of the data. I think that's so powerful. And I think you're right. Consumer expectations are maybe higher than they've ever been before. I think so many consumers, myself included, I've come to grips with the fact that my data's out there. Maybe I'm a bit more liberal with my own data than others because I'm a marketer at my core, but it's like, okay, I know my data's out there. So like use it appropriately and be a good steward and customize the experience. Brands who are still using forms to collect data for gated content. The old school playbook was somebody fills out the form, you pass it over to the SDR, and the SDR starts hammering away at the person. That's like the best way to end a brand relationship. But I think you're right. There are so many tools. There are so many cooler things we can be doing with data nowadays. I think being a good steward is being rewarded in the right ways.
Yeah. And I think you're right. One of the things that I love about Jebbit, as I said earlier, is we're filled with interesting people with very awesome backgrounds. And what's the best part to me is just we're consumers too, right? We treat these experiences as real things that we need to be passionate about. We experience them on behalf of our clients as we give our advice to clients. We've got a team who helps. Every client comes to us and says, what's the great experience? What's the best way to do this? And we get to impart our knowledge, but it comes from a place of we're consumers first. And so we know what works with us. And so it's really helpful to have that point of view. And I think that's one of the most important things that a marketer can bring to the table today is this sense that we too are experiencing the world of marketing around us. And so we know what works well with us, and replicating or I'll say maybe borrowing the good ideas that other people have is certainly very welcome, because if it works on you, it may work on some of your customers too.
Yeah. Would you, participate in it is a pretty high bar for a lot of marketers. And I think it's a good bar for us to have to surpass. So you mentioned your team at Jebbit, and I know you've been working with your team, and we've had a few conversations about going back to the basics as it pertains to marketing, which is, that almost feels like zigging when others are zagging with all things generative AI kind of evolving right in front of our eyes. So tell us a little bit about you and the team going back to the basics.
I think the way I would describe this is over the years, the experience that I've built, I've seen, I'll say, traditional playbooks for marketing that work really well. I mean, you just described, let's call it the most basic, right? It's like, hey, fill out a form and de-anonymize yourself and have an SDR reach out to you. I think while that sounds old school in today's market, to your point about the machines being able to do it all for us, I do think it's really easy for companies to lose sight of both like the human elements of marketing, but also just all of this tech that's coming at you means that a forward-thinking marketer should be paying attention to the new things. But at the same time, it's so easy to get caught up in all of those things. And it's easy to lose sight of what I'll say are like the basics of creating a deep connection with your customers and having a brand that really does the work of marketing 3 to 5 years out versus just today. And so for us, what we're talking about is just, going back to the basics of getting your channel strategy, getting that mix, getting the messaging, making sure that your brand shows up in a way that's really important. One of the things, certainly for Jebbit, is we need to do a bit of our own dog fooding, which is we have an amazing product and we don't do a good enough job as a marketing team using it. And so for us, that's a great example of just like a back to basic strategy. It's like, if we want to profess to say we know how to create great experiences, we have to deliver on that promise ourselves. So there's a lot of work going on with the team, and we have a small but mighty team of people today who are helping get our marketing operations in order, helping get the site. We've got a brand refresh that we're working on, a bunch of new things. But for us, it's just really about going back to the things that we know that work and making sure that you've got the foundation really solid. And once you've got a great foundation, then testing and experimenting with all the new tech is so much easier than trying to do it all at the same time. And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges for a marketer today is how do you sort of cut through the noise of all of the tech and all of the things and all the things that you can try and lose sight of just the basics of how to create really great connections with your customers and deliver real value. I think it's easy to lose sight of when you're all so busy. Let's face it, the pressures have never been greater on marketing teams to be able to deliver. And also, we've got some pretty big economic factors that are pushing down on marketers today where budgets are being cut. They're looking for ways to be more efficient. And so, just as I said, for us, basics is just about doing it right and doing it well in a really repeatable way so that we can create predictable pipeline for the rest of the organization and ultimately match the expectations of what customers want out of us. So It's fun, but also hard. And it's not easy to have to strip it down sometimes and go back to basics. It feels a little elementary, but making sure that you've got all that right, all the connective tissue together to tell a great story is, I think, what leads to future success.
In the spirit of the content cocktail hour, instead of eating your own dog food, we're going to call it drinking your own champagne.
I love that.
Good luck with that.
That's great. Thank you. I'm told, by the way, I'd used the term dog fooding a bunch of times. And I also just admit that this is what makes me feel really old, because I hear that and I've tested it with a few other colleagues, many of whom are much younger. And they're like, what is dog fooding? I'm like, oh, this is like an old school business term. So thank you for reframing that. I think drinking our own champagne is much nicer and probably a little more relevant for most folks.
There you go. I think back to the basics is really smart. We see this play out in the content space as well. People are always asking us, well, what's really popular right now? And what we see repeatedly is it becomes extremely easy as marketers and content marketers. It's fun and trendy and sexy to write about what does AI mean for the future of customer marketing, right? And you feel smart and like you're on the leading edge for writing that. But most often when content consumers are looking for branded content, they're wanting to be better at their job and they're wanting to be better at their basics, especially now when a lot of marketers are being asked to do things they weren't previously because budgets are shrinking, teams are shrinking. So often when people are engaging with branded content, it is to be better at the basics. I like the back to the basics theme that you and the team are going through.
Thank you. It's a work in progress. I think I alluded to, we're just getting ready to relaunch the brand of the organization. And so that has you going back to asking really hard questions about why does Jebbit exist and who do we serve and what is our purpose? And I think that those are just critical questions for every organization to be asking. But for us at this particular time, it's a really good reminder about who we are, why this company was started in the first place. And yeah, it really will help give us a purpose as it relates to the work that we do and what our teams do every single day. So we're excited about that body of work, but it too is sort of back to basics of just reminding ourselves why we exist and getting in underneath the great stories about how we help people. It's so important as a refresher to us. The work that we do needs to be meaningful, not just for our customers, but for our employees as well. And so it's been really fun to go through this exercise because it too has been like going back to basics. We have the pleasure of having some founders who are still with the organization. And it's great to hear them talk about the reason that they started the company in the first place was to help people do better marketing. And that story couldn't resonate any stronger with us today and the challenges that our customers face. So it's fun and interesting to go through this experience and strip it down to the basics and get back to what's really important and remind ourselves why we exist in the first place. So
that's awesome. You said brand refresh, not rebrand, which I know means those things mean different things to different people. But where are you at in that process? What has that process been like in the CMO seat at a startup of your size? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So for us, I think one of the most important things that we did, and I observed it when I started as a former MarTech leader at my last company, Jebbit is a solution that I would have absolutely loved to have had and wasn't actually exposed to it. And so when I got first exposed to Jebbit, was interesting because I thought, wow, this is fascinating. Like I've never heard of this. And yet I could immediately understand the value and the need. And when you look at the client roster, we have some amazing brands that are also very large brands that most marketers would know and most companies would be very envious to have. So it was unique to me that there was something missing. The fact that I was a MarTech leader and would be buying solutions just like this could relate to both the brands and the stories that they were telling. And yet I didn't really know who Jebbit was. And so it really spoke to this idea that, okay, maybe the brand itself needs a bit of love. And so when I started, I encouraged us to think about a bit of a competitive landscape. We looked at what our competitors were doing, the language that they were using, the colors that they were using to sort of figure out, do we stand out against our competitors in this space? And it was really interesting to see that most of our competitors were using the same color, the same language. And that's, I'll just note, we're probably the strongest and leading player in the space. And so it's not uncommon for the leader to have people follow them. And we're sincerely flattered by it. But what it has meant is that it's been really hard for us to stand out. And so we've gone back to, again, thinking about the values that the company stands for. How do we position ourselves in the marketplace? And now we've gone through this exercise where we've done some really great competitive analysis and had a workshop internally with our internal teams to talk about what we want to be and how we want to face the market. And so we're just about to go into the creative execution. And we've just been having a lot of fun, as I said, talking about where we are and what our story is. And so we've got this amazing brief we've written for our new creative group, who are going to take that and try and bring it to life for us. So I say refresh. Our goal is to refresh the latter half of H1 or early H2 for us. And so you'll see a new Jebbit reemerge in a few months with a new value and a new, I'll say, take on B2B marketing. And one of the most, I say, interesting and I hope fun things that will come through is this word fun, this idea that B2B brands can be really fun. We're a really dynamic and interesting group of people. And so I think there's a huge opportunity for companies to stand out there, and the values that we bring through this brand exercise and hopefully will come to life in the creative are all about a group of really passionate, fun people who like to do really interesting work. And that's what we really hope to show up as. And so hopefully people will feel Jebbit in a very different way in the coming months. And I'll say, hopefully you all know us better as well, in which case I'll call that a brand success. So hopefully people like me won't be wondering who's Jebbit in the future. They'll know. So that'll be what ultimately success looks like for us.
Hell yeah. It's supposed to be fun. I heard somebody say last week, stop apologizing for being a B2B marketer. It's like, what are we doing here? Let's have some fun with it.
Yeah, I've had the pleasure of working at some great B2B brands. And I'll just say, it is my favorite when brands do things that are a little unexpected and do things that catch our attention. As I said, we're all marketers, and it's hilarious because we're typically marketing to other marketers, particularly in the MarTech space. And we should stand out. And I think that's the opportunity that Jebbit has, because we've got such great people and we've got such great customers and such great stories to tell, that I think we can poke at fun at ourselves and both sort of the cultural tension that's out there today, which is that marketing can be a little creepy and people don't want to give their data, and we can make that a good experience. And so it feels right for other marketers to be able to see that and understand it in a really passionate way.
Oh, I can't wait to see that come to life. I'm excited for that.
All right. You're gonna get a sneak peek, Jonathan. How about that? You'll be part of our testing process. How about that?
Love it. That's perfect. All right, maybe one last question before I ask you the kind of last question we always ask everybody. You mentioned, and I don't think it's a bad thing, I think you mentioned you've been in kind of career stop every 3 or 4 years. I think the CMO seat is actually less than 3 or 4 years, the average tenure of a CMO. Maybe what's something you've learned this go around, that whether it's a CMO or a marketing leader or just a marketer kind of moving into a new role right now in this environment of the macroeconomic pressures you mentioned and just kind of everything changing so fast. What's maybe something you've learned from your first 90 days, 2 quarters in your seat that you'd recommend to other marketers do as they move into new roles?
Marketing means a lot of things at every different company. And so the most important thing you can do is just listen, pay attention to understand how people talk about marketing and what their expectations are. I think it's really easy for people to come into new roles with a predefined sort of set of outcomes. And I'll admit that I have a playbook that I've used at many organizations that talk about what success looks like. But the truth of the matter is, particularly in these economic times, your playbooks can go out the window very quickly. An old colleague of mine used to reference the Mike Tyson quote, which is, everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the face. Mo Zaid is the gentleman who gave me that quote, but that's one of my favorites. It's one of those things where you can come in with a plan and things can get turned upside down very quickly. And so the most important thing any leader can do is to be listening and to be paying attention to what's important now and what's changing. I think for me personally, one of the things I've always prided myself is just being a hands-on leader. I'm not afraid to get my hands dirty. Technically, I grew up as a designer developer once upon a time. And so I'm not afraid to crack open a web browser and code. I'm not afraid to use some of the more traditional tools that marketers have used. And so that hands-on ability also gives me, I'd say, the insight to be able to go deep on problem solving. And I think that's really important. I think there are plenty of leaders out there who come in with a predefined idea of a role, and when it doesn't match their expectations, they can blame everybody else about why it's not working for them. And my approach is just different. I just like to dig in, roll up my sleeves, make sure I understand the problem, and just be really open to the idea that things are changing fast. And particularly at companies of our size, there's a lot of work going on. So, on any given day, I might be helping build something on our site. I might be working in Marketo behind the scenes. And lots of people would go, oh, that's not what a CMO should do. And I'll go, actually, I think it's exactly what a CMO should do. It's get deep to understand the problems so that you really know how you can help your teams diagnose and come up with solutions and stay sharp. I mean, the one thing that technology does is it empowers us to do all kinds of interesting and new things, but it also can make you feel less connected to your customers. And I'll say the very specific marketing tactics that can make you successful. So I think it's really important that all leaders stay really sharp. And maybe not everybody's going to be in Marketo every single day, but at the end of the day, if you don't understand the mechanics of how those things work, I think it's really easy to lose sight of just how to build and I'll say operate a really high functioning marketing team. So for me, it's digging in, listening a lot, and just making sure that you understand the problems and being really open to change, because that seems to be the only constant in marketing these days, is that there is more and more change coming our way.
I love the combo of listening and being able to jump in with your colleagues, with your people you're managing, you're working with, able to be hands-on in a really positive way. I think that's so good. All right, last question. What is one unpopular opinion you have in the B2B marketing and or content space?
Oh boy, I have so many unpopular opinions.
It'd be easier to ask you what's one popular opinion you have, but we'll keep it with unpopular.
Because it's so fresh for us right now, this idea that, brands can't have fun and brands can't really push outside the boundaries of what's maybe just sort of appropriate in their industry. And to be clear, that maybe that's not an unpopular opinion, but I would say that it doesn't seem like a lot of B2B brands in particular have both the confidence in their customers' understanding of when they're being playful versus when they're being serious. And so I think people just get so caught up in this idea that they can't let their personalities show through in their brand that, they become a little afraid. And so I would just say, particularly if you're selling to marketers, we talked about earlier, it's just, we're all consumers at the end of the day. I appreciate great ad creative the same way anybody does. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. And if you're a B2B marketer and you've got a great product and you can come up with an interesting way to tell that story, please do something more interesting. Catch my attention in a more meaningful way. I think that's the stuff that, B2B needs more of. And again, maybe not an unpopular opinion, but I'll say I don't see as many brands doing it as I think should be. And hopefully Jebbit will live that example in the near future, in part because, I'm the guy behind the scenes helping make that come true. But I'll say, but hopefully that's what I'd like to see change. B2B brand getting better and just being more fun and real and a little more interesting. How about that?
Yeah. If it's not an unpopular opinion, it's certainly unpopular in execution because you don't see it as much as I think we'd like to. So excited to see how you all execute on it. And one of our charters for the year at the Juice has been to be more weird. Like, we're just like, let's get weird. Let's try different things.
Just to be clear, it's worked for Austin. Remarkable. Well, right? Yeah.
Get weird, stay weird. We appreciate that unpopular opinion. David, if people want to learn more and see this fun brand that's going to come to life with Jebbit, what's the best way to get in touch with you and or Jebbit?
Anyone, please connect with me on LinkedIn. Always. That is the tried and true way to get connected. But Jebbit.com is where our company lives. Feel free to take a look at it today. Feel free to give me any commentary that you'd like. And I'll say, more importantly, stay tuned for the new and improved Jebbit brand, which will hopefully catch people's attention and get people more excited about the great work that our teams do in the coming future. So stay tuned.
Awesome. David, thank you for joining the Content Cocktail Hour. Everybody go check out Jebbit.com. Most importantly, you can see the before and after as we've talked about today. And everyone, thank you for listening today. We will see you next time, same place. Cheers.
Thanks so much, Jonathan.
Thank you. Thank you for joining the Content Cocktail Hour powered by The Juice. If you want to see more episodes or more resources curated for your role, join us on app.thejuicehq.com. See you next time, same place. Cheers.